I'm Ryan Johnston, and this is my story about getting covered in a nasty ass chemical. So probably back in 2009, I started working for Williams Midstream at that time. I grew up working for my dad in the oil field. We did a lot of contract work for BP, Red Cedar, stuff like that, but nothing what you'd call like hands-on in the actual petroleum business. We just did like building maintenance, site maintenance, cleaning up, painting buildings, stuff like that. Just basically handyman stuff. So that got me kind of started in the oil field. I did that since I was like 14. Learned how to drive hot shotting trailer loads of pipe to location. My grandpa taught me how to drive a stick shift doing that. So,
how old were you when you was learning to drive stick shift?
14. He was in the passenger seat, so
Sweet.
no, that's cool. So yeah, that kind of got me started there. And my dad had a business. He actually started as a contract janitor down in Farmington, actually at the building that I work at now. It was Amoco back then. And the main dude went on vacation, or the actual janitor went on vacation, and I guess my dad did a good job of like kicking ass and doing stuff that he didn't do usually, so they kept him around. And my sister had her accident, fell in a ditch and drowned when she was 2, so he ended up getting transferred up here right after that to the Durango branch, and started working there as a janitor and was doing good. And like anytime they needed something done around, he'd pick it up and do it. And so basically they wanted to hire him on, but that wasn't as much pay. I guess it wasn't as lucrative. I guess he saw the ability to do something more with it, so he started his own business, and that's where I got my start doing all that. And then about probably 2008, 2009, the oil industry took a big dip, took a crap. Excuse me. So basically his business folded up, and I had been going to the fort studying English education for 3 years. Took a break and decided to just work for him because he was paying me pretty well, but he could kind of see the writing on the wall. So he told me, he's like, oh, you need to go finish your degree. He said, if you go down to the School of Energy, get your degree, that's like your foot in the door for any major oil company. And so all my credits transferred down there. All I had to do was take a certificate program, and I would get my degree. So I went in. Back then you had to interview to get into school because it was kind of hard to get into. It's not now, but so they asked me, there's 2 programs. They said, do you want to be a lease operator, which is basically a pumper, or do you want to be a mechanic? I told them, I was like, I want to be a lease operator. And they're like, why? And I said, because mechanics work too hard. Lease operators just sit on their ass. So they put me in the mechanic program.
Awesome.
So I finished that, got my degree, and applied for Chevron. Got hooked up there, and they hired me on as a trainee. Went to work there. There was kind of a technicality kind of thing, so I had to leave for a little bit. But the head boss was like, hey, we want you back. You got to go for 6 months, work somewhere else, and then, I'll call you up, come back, we want you for sure. And it was paying really well. So that really sucked because it was not foreseen. It was a paperwork error that kind of screwed me. They saw where I was coming from, but basically they considered it falsifying a document, and they called me up and they're like, look, we get where you're coming from. It was a court case that had happened, but it was getting dismissed, and I knew that. So on my background check, I didn't want to draw any attention to myself, so I didn't put it down. I didn't see that it said in small print anything charged against you or pending. So it showed up as pending, and they were like, oh, okay, we get it. And then like a month later, they were like, yeah, we consider that falsifying a document. So long story short, I went from a really good paying job. I had 2 kids. Max had just been born, kind of broke, looking for work. Called Williams, and they were like, yeah, we've got a trainee position open. I was like, sweet, I'll take it. So that was the plant over there by the airport. And it's cool. It was a good job. Didn't pay the greatest, but it was newer stuff that I hadn't dealt with before, plant operations and stuff like that. So started working there, learning everything, and probably, when did I start there? It's probably like September, November. So we worked through, and plants never stop. They continually just churning out a product, and you can isolate parts of them and do a little bit of maintenance, but basically you put the major stuff off until they do what's called a turnaround or plant shutdown, and they just, whole plant's dead. They'll reroute the gas to other places, but they are shut down, and you do all your major maintenance there. So I was in charge of the amine. Well, I wasn't in charge of it. I just did the maintenance on it. What happened was this plant was really, really old. There's a lot of sketchy stuff in there. But these main compressors in A plant were called TLA Clarks. And they were designed in like the 30s. And they had been in operation since like, I want to say 48 or 49 is what somebody told me. They were old school. And because they were so old school, they leaked a bunch. So they'd have this maintenance crew start on the PM on 1, and when it got done, they'd go to 2, and they'd work all the way through number 7, and by the time they got to number 7, they'd go back to number 1 because it was already time for the maintenance again. So these things are so old, they used a lot of oil, and I don't know how much you know about engines, but a compressor is just an engine. It's got pistons, it smashes the gas, they've got rings. Well, these rings blow by with oil because you're lubricating it so much. That oil gets entrained in the gas then goes to the rest of the system. Well, so I want to say one of the first things that it came in contact was the amine plant. Amine is a liquid chemical that they use, and it's been 12 years, so I want to say it was used for CO2 removal. I could be wrong, so if anybody's watching this and wants to correct me, call Jesse and chew his ass.
Put it in the comments.
Yeah. So basically this amine gets entrained with a bunch of oil, and you'd have to go out there and you'd skim off the top, you'd open a valve, and this amine, if you could get it right, the oil would come out. Basically you're trying to catch 3-4 inches on this floating level, and if I remember right, you could control the level or whatever, and that's kind of where you would keep an eye on. But this stuff would come out, it'd go to a pit, and they'd suck it out and take it to a containment or whatever. Well, this amine's like nasty. And one of the one of the ingredients in it was called pepperzine or pepperdine or something like that. It's a really nasty carcinogen. So fast forward, plant turnaround comes around. I'm still an intern. And the way Williams worked was they had a planner, and he would come up with a job plan for the job that was supposed to happen. He'd handle isolation, he'd handle all this stuff, and I believe he'd hand it off for peer review basically to like one of the senior members of the staff. They'd look through it and make sure that he hadn't missed a step or anything. So plant turnaround's coming up, and since I was the one who skimmed the oil and stuff like that, they're like, okay, you're going to be in charge of this. So there's a contact tower, which is it's just like a D-high for glycol, but it's a tower, it's got all these bubble trays in it, so liquid's being pumped through the top, it fills the trays, there's bubble caps in it that the gas flows through, so the gas gets mixed with the amine, and that way it can contact and absorb as much CO2 as possible. So there's that tower, there's an intercooler that runs cool water back through the amine. And God, this is like 12, I should have thought through this before I did the thing. I think you've got to cool it back down. They do the same thing with glycol because it has a maximum absorption rate at a certain temperature. So basically, you're heating it up to get rid of the byproduct, and you're cooling it back down to help it with its maximum absorption. But the water and the amine never mix. It's a bunch of tubes that flow through with the outer shell being the amine. And then, I want to say that was it. Yeah. But, so anyways, job plan comes up, and I'm freaking out. I've never had a plant turnaround before. Like, all kinds of cool stuff. They've got a flare. A flare is, they light this thing, and basically in the event of an emergency, they can shoot the gas through it, and it keeps your greenhouse gases from escaping. they do it for different reasons and different applications, but basically that's what it's for. That plant down the road. So if they blow that one dead, you'll see a flame shooting. If there's an issue with line pressure or something, you'll see it shooting. So anyways, plant day comes up. Everyone's reviewed all of the processes. Everyone's got it lined out. We've scheduled our jobs. I've got a crew coming to me, everything like that. And they set me up with what's called a frac tank. It's just a big old 400 barrel tank. They brought me they call it a trash pump, but it's basically a centrifugal pump. Yeah, like an irrigation pump. Bring me some, we had them at the plant, 3-inch braided steel lines. And basically the plan is we're going to shut the plant down. You take your amine, you blow it into this, because this stuff's expensive. You're going to blow it in, or pump it into this tank. And then your crew's going to come in and hydrolance the intercooler, because you'll get buildup inside those tubes and you need to keep it clean. It's like doing a flush on your coolant system for your car, but they use a hydrolance. It's like a 1/4-inch hose with a head on it that has 4 jets shooting backwards and 1 that shoots forwards. They make different variations of them. Some of them spin and stuff like that. But basically what it does is it cleans and it propels itself through the tube, because those face backwards. So you're supposed to go in and hydrolance each one of those. So that was the plan, and I didn't know nothing about it. Like I said, I'd been oil filled, but I hadn't been processed or anything like that. So they shut the plant down, blow the flare. I've never seen a bigger freaking fire in my life. That thing was, I mean, the main line coming into this station is 30 inches. I don't even remember the pressure.
30?
Yeah, 30 inches.
Wow.
Yeah, it's gnarly. Like, it's a cool experience, but still. So there's a lot of pressure, 30 inches, and you've got that capacity all over the plant and everything like that. Big ass flare. So once that gets done, they give the whole plant has walkie-talkies like on the regular anyways, but they give the okay, go clear, do your thing. So I follow the job plan, and I go and hook up the steel hoses to the contact tower, take them over to the frac tank. Now this whole thing is inside a secondary containment, concrete basin. It's for spill control and everything like that. And I had the trash pump set up on the edge of the secondary containment, and the frac tank is over in the gravel, because they obviously can't set it there. So open my valves, apply my lockout, tag out, or whatever, kick on the trash pump. I'm sitting there. All of a sudden, I turn around and I look, and there's this amine is spraying in the air. And I'm panicking because I need this job really, really fucking bad. That's a really nasty chemical getting outside the secondary containment, and I didn't know what the hell had happened. So I looked, and I was like, oh, crap. So I just, like, instinctively panicked, grabbed the 3-inch hose, and start just pulling this pump closer into the containment so that it's not spraying on the gravel anymore. And it's burning the shit out of my hands, because if it's anything like glycol, they burn glycol at like 375 to 400. So that thing was probably around 375 to 400. And like obviously wasn't as hot because it's got to go through those layers, but still I'm touching hot ass metal. Pulling this thing in, the spray stops hitting as much of the gravel, and I haul ass over there and just killed the pump. It's just a toggle switch. And as I'm doing it, I noticed that pump or the plug that you primed the pump with was plastic. This shit's hot. It had melted that out. So kill the pump, stop it. There's amine still flowing out of from hydrostatic pressure, so I go over and shut the contactor, haul ass over, shut the frac tank. I'm covered in this stuff. It's hot, it stinks. One of the guys on the radio was being a smart ass and was like, hey, there's amine spraying everywhere, just so you know. I was like, yeah, I got it, thanks. So get it shut down, and I call my supervisor, and he's like, what the hell happened? And I was like, I don't know, I followed the steps. And then they started thinking they had done this job the year before, but instead of just shutting the plant down and gas and everything, they shut the system down for the amine, so no more flame, and then they continued to cycle the gas through it. So it cooled the liquid down to a point where they didn't have to worry about that plug melting out. So we figured it out. I think we skipped that part. Then I went over to pump out the intercooler, and I start pumping, and my brain was just frazzled. I'm still covered in this crap. And there's
Is it like viscous? Like we're talking like oil?
oil,
What's it?
oil sticky.
Okay.
It's a lot like glycol. Glycol's
Yeah.
coolant,
Yeah.
just like antifreeze for your car.
Okay.
It's a lot like you know how it gets sticky if it gets on you. It's just nasty. But I didn't want to like go home in the middle of these plant turnarounds. They lose. God, it's an ungodly amount of money, but it's a necessary evil. But each day they're shut down, they lose, and I'm sitting there like, I need this job, I need this job, I need this job. So I just worked through it, and so my brain's frazzled. I'm pumping the liquid out of this intercooler into the frac tank so they can at least do that job. And for some reason I panicked and thought that I hadn't opened the vents on the top of the intercooler. And I was freaking out because I was like, liquid's coming out, it's causing a vacuum. Oh God, what happens if it collapses this intercooler and I destroy it? I'm an idiot because a centrifugal pump doesn't draw a vacuum. It just is gravity fed. It's not a positive displacement pump, and even then you still wouldn't draw a vacuum to crush an intercooler. But I was frazzled, I wasn't even thinking. So I haul ass up to the top of this where these vents are and open them up. It's still hot and under pressure, and this shit goes spraying everywhere. Not the liquid, but the fumes.
Okay.
And I'm freaking out thinking, oh God, because I was supposed to do this before I kicked on the pump. So I was like, what happens if somebody comes here and doesn't see that sees that I didn't have my proper lockout tag out? I'm going to get fired. And so I stood there and breathed this shit in while I threw on my lockout tag out to make it look like I'd done it properly. And finished the job up the rest of the day. It was a 14-hour day. I worked in that crap all day. Got home, cleaned up, didn't get any trouble for it because really it was their fault for not. And it wasn't anybody's fault. It was just missed. It fell through. But so cut to the chase, go back to work for Chevron. And then, so if that was 9, it'd be like 3 years later, ended up getting cancer. And I mean, it could have been a coincidence. Is testicular cancer. It's of people, men like 35 and under, 90% of the cases is testicular. So there's a high percentage it was coincidental. You still won't convince me that it didn't have something to do with it, because that's some I remember like when they first put me in charge of the amine plant, they were like, don't touch that crap. It is really bad for you. And then there's a steam system that runs through the whole plant. And so you'd siphon that stuff off, and it would land out in the secondary containment, and you'd have to figure a way to push it towards, there's this like trough or sump basically where they can pump it out. Well, as it cools down, it gets really gelatinous, especially with the oil in it. So you could push it with a rubber mop or whatever, or they had this steam plant there, and you heat it back up with the steam, and you push it. Well, I did that for like a month and a half, and finally somebody told me, they were like, no, that just evaporates out the peprazine or pepperdine or whatever. So basically I was turning that crap into fumes, not knowing it. So yeah, I don't know. It was it was something that, I mean, I still would have done it because my family, I needed the job. Like, it was rough times there for a little bit. I went from making really good money to hourly there was just over half of what I was making. Yeah. So I probably would have done the same thing, but I don't know. It's definitely, like you said, you were looking for something that significantly affected your life, and I'd say that significantly affected my life. So